What would you do if you saw your missing child in a foreign city 5 years after they disappeared? For Sarah Mitchell, that impossible moment became reality when she turned down a quiet street in Amsterdam and came face to face with the daughter she thought was gone forever. The story began 5 years earlier, on what should have been the perfect family vacation. Sarah Mitchell, a 38-year-old marketing executive from Denver, had saved for 2 years to afford the Caribbean cruise for herself, her husband David, and their 12-year-old daughter Emma. The three of them had been through a difficult period following David's job loss and Sarah's mother's death, and they desperately needed time together to reconnect as a family. The cruise ship, Ocean Paradise, was everything the brochures had promised. 7 days of luxury sailing through crystal-clear waters, with stops at tropical islands that looked like postcards. Sarah had documented every moment of the first 3 days with hundreds of photos. Emma splashing in the ship's pool, David trying his luck at the casino, family dinners at the captain's table they had won in a lottery. Emma was a bright, curious child with her father's adventurous spirit and her mother's cautious nature. She had been excited about every aspect of the cruise, from the midnight buffet to the teen club activities. She made friends easily with other children on board and had convinced her parents to let her participate in a supervised treasure hunt on the ship's 4th day. That was the last time Sarah saw her daughter alive, or so she thought. The treasure hunt was scheduled to last 2 hours, with children divided into teams and given clues that would lead them through various parts of the ship. Sarah and David had decided to enjoy some adult time at the spa, while Emma participated in what seemed like a perfectly safe, supervised activity. When they returned to collect Emma at the designated meeting point, she wasn't there. The activity coordinator, a young woman named Jessica, seemed confused and slightly panicked as she checked her clipboard repeatedly. "I'm sure she's just running late," Jessica had said, her voice betraying her growing concern. "Let me radio the other staff members." But as minutes turned to hours, it became clear that something was terribly wrong. Emma had simply vanished. Security footage showed her participating in the early stages of the treasure hunt, but somewhere along the way she had disappeared from the group without anyone noticing. The search that followed was extensive but fruitless. The ship's security team, led by Chief Officer Martinez, conducted a room-by-room search of the entire vessel. Passengers were asked to check their cabins and any areas where a child might hide or become trapped. The Coast Guard was contacted, and helicopters searched the waters around the ship's route. David had insisted on joining the search parties, checking every deck, every storage area, every possible hiding place. He worked alongside the crew for 18 hours straight, refusing to rest until they found his daughter. Sarah remained in their cabin, manning the phone and coordinating with authorities on shore, her marketing skills proving useful in organizing the massive search effort. But Emma was nowhere to be found. On the 6th day of the cruise, as the ship prepared to return to port, Chief Officer Martinez delivered the news that every parent dreads. "Mrs. Mitchell, we've searched every inch of this vessel. We've reviewed all security footage multiple times. Your daughter is not on this ship." The implication was clear but unspoken. Emma had somehow gone overboard. The vast ocean that had seemed so beautiful just days earlier had become a hungry monster that had swallowed their child without leaving a trace. "That's impossible," David had insisted, his voice hoarse from days of calling Emma's name. "She's a strong swimmer, but she wouldn't go near the railings alone. Someone must have seen something." But no one had seen anything, despite the hundreds of passengers and crew members on board. Despite the security cameras positioned throughout the ship, Emma had simply vanished as if she had never existed. The return to Denver was a nightmare of media attention, police interviews, and insurance investigations. Sarah found herself answering the same questions repeatedly. Had Emma been unhappy? Had she shown any signs of wanting to harm herself? Had there been any arguments or family conflicts? The questions implied what everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to say directly that Emma had jumped or fallen overboard, and that her parents had somehow been negligent in allowing it to happen. David threw himself into his own investigation, hiring private detectives and scouring the internet for any information about similar disappearances on cruise ships. He contacted families of other missing passengers, joined support groups, and became obsessed with maritime safety regulations. Sarah, meanwhile, struggled to return to any semblance of normal life. She took leave from her job and spent her days creating missing person flyers, contacting international authorities, and maintaining a website dedicated to finding Emma. She refused to clear out Emma's bedroom, keeping it exactly as her daughter had left it, convinced that Emma would somehow find her way home. The strain proved too much for their marriage. 18 months after Emma's disappearance, David moved out, unable to cope with Sarah's refusal to accept their daughter's death and her insistence on continuing the search. Their divorce was finalized 2 years later, another casualty of the tragedy that had destroyed their family. Sarah's friends and family gradually stopped mentioning Emma, assuming that the passage of time would help Sarah move on and find closure. But for Sarah, every day without her daughter was a fresh wound. She reduced her social circle to avoid well-meaning but painful conversations about letting go and finding peace. 3 years after the divorce, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone who knew her. She quit her job, sold her house, and used the proceeds to fund what she called her global search mission. If Emma was alive somewhere, and Sarah refused to believe otherwise, she was going to find her. Sarah's search took her to ports throughout the Caribbean, where she showed Emma's photo to dock workers, taxi drivers, and local police. She visited children's shelters, hospitals, and schools in Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras, following rumors and tips that invariably led nowhere. Her quest expanded to Europe when she learned about international trafficking networks that sometimes operated in connection with cruise ship routes. She traveled to London, Paris, and Rome, working with international law enforcement agencies and non-profit organizations dedicated to finding missing children. It was this search that brought Sarah to Amsterdam 5 years after Emma's disappearance. She had been working with a Dutch organization called Missing Children Europe and had scheduled meetings with several social workers who specialized in recovering trafficked minors. Amsterdam in late autumn was cold and dreary, a stark contrast to the tropical paradise where her family had been destroyed. Sarah had been staying in a small hotel near the city center, spending her days in meetings with officials and her evenings walking the streets, showing Emma's photo to anyone willing to look. The photo she carried had been digitally aged by forensic artists to show what Emma might look like at 17. The girl in the image retained Emma's distinctive green eyes and heart-shaped face, but her features had matured, her hair was longer, and there was a weariness in the computer-generated expression that broke Sarah's heart every time she looked at it. On her 4th day in Amsterdam, Sarah was returning to her hotel after a particularly discouraging meeting with a social worker who had gently suggested that perhaps it was time to consider other possibilities. The phrase was a euphemism that Sarah had heard countless times, a polite way of suggesting that Emma was dead and that her search was an exercise in denial. Sarah was walking down a narrow side street, lost in thought and fighting back tears, when she heard laughter that made her blood freeze. It was distinctive laughter, melodic and infectious, exactly like Emma's childhood giggle, but deeper, more mature. She turned toward the sound and saw a group of young women standing outside what appeared to be a cafe. They were dressed in revealing clothing, despite the cold weather, and there was something about their positioning and the watchful eye of a nearby man that immediately set off alarm bells in Sarah's mind. One of the women was facing away from Sarah, but her profile, her posture, and especially her laugh were achingly familiar. Sarah's heart began racing as she studied the young woman more closely. The hair was different, darker and styled in a way Emma had never worn. The clothes were adult and inappropriate, but the shape of her face, the way she tilted her head when she laughed, the graceful movement of her hands. Sarah pulled out her phone and, trying to appear casual, took several photos of the group. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the device steady. She moved closer, pretending to look at a shop window while straining to hear the conversation. The young women were speaking Dutch, a language Sarah didn't understand, but their voices were clear, and there was no mistaking it now. One of those voices belonged to her daughter. Emma was alive. Emma was in Amsterdam. Emma was 17 years old and appeared to be caught up in something that made Sarah's worst nightmares pale in comparison. Sarah's first instinct was to run to her daughter, to call her name, to wrap her in her arms and never let go. But years of working with international rescue organizations had taught her to be strategic. If Emma was being controlled by traffickers, a public reunion could put her in immediate danger or cause her captors to move her before authorities could intervene. Instead, Sarah quickly walked to the nearest police station, clutching her phone with its precious cargo of photos. Her Dutch was limited, but she managed to communicate the essentials. Her daughter had been missing for 5 years. She had just seen her on the street, and she needed immediate help. The desk sergeant, a middle-aged woman named Officer van der Berg, initially seemed skeptical. Missing children who reappeared after 5 years were the stuff of movies, not real police work. But Sarah's obvious distress and the documentation she carried Missing person reports, international police bulletins, and correspondence with various law enforcement agencies convinced the officer to take her seriously. Within an hour, Sarah was sitting in an interview room with Detective Inspector Hans Muller, a specialist in human trafficking cases. Detective Muller was a patient man with kind eyes who had seen too much of humanity's capacity for evil, but he was also experienced enough to recognize genuine maternal anguish when he saw it. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said gently, "I understand you believe you've found your daughter who has been missing for 5 years. Can you tell me exactly what you saw?" Sarah showed him the photos she had taken, pointing out the features that matched Emma's childhood appearance. She explained about the distinctive laugh, the familiar gestures, and the overwhelming maternal recognition that had convinced her this was her child. Detective Mueller studied the photos carefully, then pulled up information about the area where Sarah had seen the young women. His expression grew serious as he read through files on his computer. "This location is known to us," he said finally. "It's an area where we frequently encounter victims of trafficking. If this is indeed your daughter, she may be in significant danger, and we'll need to proceed very carefully." The next several hours were a blur of activity. Detective Mueller contacted colleagues in the trafficking unit, who began surveillance of the area where Sarah had seen Emma. International databases were searched for any connections between Emma's disappearance and known trafficking networks operating in the Caribbean. Sarah was asked to wait at the police station while the operation was planned. The waiting was agony, knowing that Emma was so close, yet being unable to simply walk up to her and bring her home. But she had learned enough about trafficking operations to understand that victims were often moved quickly when their captors sensed any threat. At 11 p.m. that night, Detective Mueller returned to the interview room where Sarah had been waiting for 6 hours. His expression was both triumphant and somber. "We've recovered a young woman who matches your daughter's description," he said. "She's been taken to a secure location where she's receiving medical attention and counseling. However, I need to prepare you for what you might find. 5 years in this situation, it changes a person. She may not be the child you remember." Sarah's heart was pounding as she was driven to the secure facility where Emma was being held. The building was nondescript, designed to be anonymous and safe for trafficking victims who were often too traumatized to trust anyone, even their rescuers. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a psychologist who specialized in treating trafficking victims, met Sarah at the entrance. Her expression was compassionate but serious as she prepared Sarah for the reunion. "Your daughter, Emma, is physically healthy, but she's been through severe psychological trauma," Dr. Vasquez explained. "She's been conditioned to distrust authority figures and to fear anyone who might represent a threat to her captors. She may not immediately remember you or her life before her abduction." Sarah nodded, understanding intellectually but emotionally desperate to see her child after 5 years of not knowing whether she was alive or dead. When they entered the room where Emma was waiting, Sarah's heart nearly stopped. There, sitting on a simple bed and wearing clothes provided by the rescue organization, was her daughter, older, thinner, with eyes that held too much knowledge of the world's cruelty, but unmistakably Emma. For a long moment, mother and daughter simply stared at each other. Emma's expression was wary, confused, as if she was trying to place a half-remembered face from a dream she'd almost forgotten. "Emma," Sarah whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might shatter the moment. "Baby, it's me. It's Mom." Emma's face crumpled as memories came flooding back. "Mom?" she said in a voice made hoarse by years of speaking other languages. "Is it really you? I thought they told me you were dead. They said no one was looking for me anymore." Sarah crossed the room and gathered her daughter in her arms, both of them sobbing as 5 years of separation and trauma began to pour out. Emma was taller now, no longer the child Sarah had lost, but she still fit perfectly in her mother's embrace. "I never stopped looking," Sarah whispered into Emma's hair. "Not for one day. I never gave up hope." The reunion was everything Sarah had dreamed of, and nothing like she had imagined. Emma was alive, which was the miracle she had prayed for every day. But her daughter had been through experiences that no child should endure, and the road to recovery would be long and difficult. In the days that followed, Sarah learned the horrible truth about what had happened to Emma on that cruise ship 5 years earlier. She had been specifically targeted by traffickers who had infiltrated the ship's crew. The treasure hunt had been used as cover to separate her from other children and lure her to a location where she could be taken without being seen. Emma had been smuggled off the ship at the next port and transported through a network of criminals who specialized in trafficking children to European markets. She had been moved frequently, never staying in one location long enough to establish relationships or find opportunities to escape. The psychological manipulation had been sophisticated and cruel. Her captors had convinced her that her parents had died in a car accident and that no one was searching for her. They had created a false identity for her, taught her to speak Dutch and other languages, and gradually conditioned her to accept her situation as normal. Detective Mueller explained that Emma's case was part of a larger international trafficking ring that had been under investigation for several years. Her recovery had provided crucial evidence that would help law enforcement break up the network and rescue other victims. The legal proceedings that followed were complex and emotionally draining. Emma had to provide testimony about her experiences, which required her to relive traumas she was still processing. Sarah remained by her side throughout, providing the stability and love that Emma needed to begin healing. The physical reunion was only the beginning of their journey back to each other. Emma had missed 5 crucial years of development. Her entire adolescence had been stolen from her. She had to relearn how to trust adults, how to make decisions for herself, and how to envision a future beyond mere survival. Sarah, meanwhile, had to adjust her expectations and understanding of motherhood. The child she had lost was gone forever, replaced by a young woman who had been forced to grow up too quickly and in ways no parent could imagine. Their relationship had to be rebuilt from scratch, based on who they both were now, rather than who they had been 5 years earlier. The media attention was intense but carefully managed. Sarah's story of never giving up hope and eventually finding her daughter captured international headlines. She used the platform to raise awareness about child trafficking and to advocate for better security measures on cruise ships. David, Sarah's ex-husband, was contacted by authorities after Emma's recovery. The reunion between father and daughter was complicated by years of separation and the trauma Emma had endured. He struggled with guilt over having given up the search and divorced Sarah, while Emma had difficulty reconnecting with a parent who had assumed she was dead. 6 months after Emma's rescue, Sarah made the decision to relocate to Amsterdam permanently. Emma needed specialized care that was available there, and Sarah wanted to be close to the support networks that had helped rescue her daughter. She also felt a responsibility to continue working with organizations that fought child trafficking, using her experience to help other families avoid or survive similar tragedies. Emma's recovery was gradual but steady. She enrolled in a special program for trafficking survivors that helped her complete her education while receiving psychological support. She learned to trust again, to form friendships, and to believe in the possibility of a normal future. The question of what Emma wanted to do with her life became central to her healing process. She expressed interest in studying psychology and social work, wanting to help other victims of trafficking. Her experiences had given her insights that could be valuable in rescue and recovery efforts. 2 years after their reunion, Sarah and Emma returned to Denver for a visit. Emma wanted to see her childhood home, her old school, and the places that had shaped her early years. The visit was emotional but healing, allowing Emma to reclaim positive memories that had been suppressed by trauma. Standing in Emma's childhood bedroom, which Sarah had preserved exactly as Emma had left it, mother and daughter reflected on their incredible journey. The room that had once been a shrine to loss had become a symbol of hope fulfilled. "I used to dream about this room," Emma said, touching the stuffed animals that had waited for her return. "In the worst moments, I would close my eyes and remember being safe here." Sarah hugged her daughter, marveling at the young woman she had become despite everything she had endured. "You are always safe in my heart," she said, "and you always will be." Their story became a beacon of hope for other families dealing with missing children. Sarah's refusal to give up, her years of searching, and her eventual success in finding Emma proved that sometimes miracles do happen for those who never stop believing. The investigation that followed Emma's rescue led to the arrest of dozens of traffickers and the recovery of other victims. The cruise ship industry implemented new security measures to prevent similar abductions. Emma's case became a catalyst for international cooperation in fighting child trafficking. Today, Emma is studying to become a social worker, specializing in trauma recovery. She speaks at conferences about her experience and works with law enforcement agencies to help identify and rescue trafficking victims. Her survival and recovery have inspired countless others and proved that even the darkest chapters of life can lead to purposes greater than we imagine. Sarah continues her advocacy work while rebuilding her relationship with her daughter. Their bond, forged in loss and reborn in miraculous reunion, has become stronger than ever. They have learned that love truly can conquer the worst that humanity has to offer. The question of what you would do if you saw your missing child in a foreign city after 5 years had been answered. For Sarah Mitchell, the answer was clear. You never stop believing. You never stop searching. And you never stop loving. Sometimes, against all odds, that love is enough to bring miracles to life.